Hey everyone, welcome to the 19th. This is the 19th episode of Four Mortal Coils. And can you fucking believe it? Can we say that? Are we saying that? All right. Can you believe it? We have 4 people for a Four Mortal Coils episode.
Hey,
Isn't that fucking... There's something to be said about that. It's a good feeling. It's a better vibe. I mean, I like you two, but you know, I don't know. There's the feng shui of a fourth person thrown in there. I like a lot. So for this episode, I'm really looking forward to it. I actually prepared and I'm really excited. The exact topic question is, what are the limitations of science? Now, and
bold out of the gate.
Well,
this is definitely a culturally controversial topic.
Yeah. Next week we're gonna be doing abortion or some shit. I'm looking forward to it.
No.
I wish we had Jake on for this, but I will.
God, we've been trying to get Jake on since literally the first week. I swear to God. And
he'd be able to do a better job than I will, but
well, that's just how Jake is. You can't compare yourself to Jake. He's a weird. He's
dedicated.
He's not even a person.
Yeah.
But yeah. So going back to the topic question at hand. So going back to the topic question at hand. I thought what we should do here, since I'm hosting it. Oh, before I say anything, if you have any thoughts, listener, about this episode, feel free to post a comment down below, all that kind of thing. It's a bit annoying to say that because it makes you look a bit hamish, but it works. People actually start coming in liking and shit, which is nicer, which is cool, and it's fun. So coming back to it, for this episode, before we get started, I wanted to go through and give a central thrust of what I think this conversation is, and then from there I want Stephen to correct me, or Michael to say something, or Bray to interject a feeling. That's basically the way I want this to go, and I want to see where we go from there. So what are the limitations of science? So before this episode started, I went through and just essentially brought up and asked ChatGPT, GPT-4, and I was like, hey, what is the general fundamental process of the scientific method? Now, that's not precisely pitch and letter perfect to this question. What are the limitations of science? Because science, does it extend beyond what we would call the scientific method? That's a question in itself. But coming back to it, scientific method listed out would be essentially the following. 1, an observation of some sort. 2, some sort of question leading to a hypothesis, which leads to an experiment, data collection, analysis, followed by a conclusion. So that's essentially the scientific method listed there. And then from that conclusion, you can then draw yourself and to make further analyses based upon further hypotheses to which you can then derive further answers. That's one way to visualize the scientific method today. So going from that position, what are the things that are outside of the purview, quite literally cannot be covered by that sort of thing, quite literally forever? Are these things even things we should even concern ourselves with? I mean, is there even why waste our time with something that can't possibly be scientifically derived? What are these? We need to paint for ourselves the room that we exist in, the space that we're in, and how we feel about these things. So with that in mind, I'm curious how Stephen feels about the conversation so far, and then from there I want to see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, welcome, Mortal Coils. My first and immediate complaint is not enough data, right? There's not enough to talk about yet, you know? But in the meantime, what are the limitations on science is what we're here to talk about. For those cores of us who do not know, I'm a science teacher in the extreme Bible Belt. God help me. But that being said, here's what I would like to say about this conversation on the outset, sort of at the beginning, so that we can go ahead and put it out there and make it known what I will not tolerate, and what no one should tolerate. And I'm certain that the conversation will not go this way. Hopefully I don't upset the algorithms too badly by saying so, but we come from a time where we have had demonstrable hardships with the COVID-19 plague and everything, and everyone remembers that. Everyone knows in recent memory we have a plague at hand. And that being said, we've done a remarkable job defending the species against this plague by science. There's a lot of distrust nowadays in scientists, in the body of science, in the discipline of science. I see it almost every day. It's part of my day job. It's part of my day job to literally stomp that out. Listener, if this is the first time you're hearing it from me or from anyone else, science is your only hope. That's it. I mean, that's all. You know, science is the study of the material world, and because the material world is all that we have, that's it. It's the study of what we are in, and it can only help you. That being said, I challenge my students every beginning of the year. You know, when we're discussing scientific discipline and whatnot, I ask them what scientific knowledge is dangerous. You know, like can knowledge be dangerous? And they say, well, yes, of course it can. And I say, well, yes, of course it doesn't. Yes, of course it doesn't mean any of that. Knowledge is not dangerous. What we do with it is dangerous. And so, like I tried to say earlier, that's where I would like to leave off.
Cool. All right. Well, that's a great end. And with that, I'd like to spend a second to introduce our special guest for this episode, Michael. Finally, we have ourselves a fourth column, a fourth coil. Thank God. And with that in mind, love to hear if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit or just get straight into the topic. How do you feel about limitations of science?
Well, I'll do a brief introduction. So, my name's Michael. I met Trevor when we were going through school. I was in graduate school at the time, but I saw little bits and pieces about a philosophy club, and I was never really truly involved, but I did get to hang out a little bit. And we hung out at the coffee shop off of campus quite a bit.
You had a good time there, dude. It was a time.
It was great. It was great. I was waiting to graduate, reading union books and all sorts of other crazy stuff. I guess I should say my background is I'm one of those computer science people that's like really weirdly into the occult. Yes, I guess if I want to be very like frontward honest. So like this particular topic area. Now I'm not anti-science. This is more of a question of, does science contain all possible useful information in navigating reality? And the question, my particular answer to that is, of course, like, well, no. Computation is limited. The axioms of science, such as the scientific method, which is like the base case we might all adhere to, it has limitations because it is a rigid system, and therefore it inherently can't describe all of reality. It especially has limitations in things that are like fundamentally not something that you can use the lens of empiricism on, right? So like you can't observe somebody else's internal state in the same way that they observe it. That's just fundamentally something you can't do. Maybe in some far-flung future we can figure out something with that. Maybe Neuralink is the the thing that allows us to access that weird transcendence of the other person. But no, I think that's where I currently would draw the line pretty hard. There's also probably what I would say. So I'm not terribly well read, but I will say I am broadly aware. So with regards to basically the philosophy of science, which is something you can at certain universities take classes on, you go over like the history of the discipline, or the history of science, and you also go through like what is the reasoning behind why we do it the way we do it, right? And I think from a computer science perspective, I talk about inputs and outputs of functions a lot. And if we look at science as like a input-output kind of system, you have an input, which is an observation, like you said earlier, and your output is a probability. So very commonly, at least, if you read a lot of like papers, generally speaking, they're going to be giving you some sort of, this was our p-value, this was our target to breach, to say that this is likely some sort of like connected thing, and it's not just correlated, like there's something going on here. These things are connected. And so I think that actually can clarify for some people when you hear things get called theories versus laws. When we say laws, typically the differentiation is that a scientific law is like pretty clear cut. We're like, yeah, this is not going to be disproven anytime soon. Versus theories, of course, we hold as not absolute truths, but as like good enough for the time being.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for our listener out there with us, this is kind of what I'm talking about. And Michael, please don't assume that I'm going after you or anyone else.
No, absolutely. I speak from ignorance quite often.
Yeah, so I mean,
we all do.
Kind of,
all four of us
it's
do.
kind of pretty golden that you've said exactly the wrong thing.
Sure.
So a scientific law is an observation, people. It's not something that can be broken. It's not a matter of belief or a matter of engineering or anything like that. A law is something that is. It's an observation. Okay. So, for example, whenever we talk about the laws of gravity, we're talking about the definite math that goes behind them, right? So we observe that every object on this earth, once released, falls, and so that is a law. And so laws usually come with some math that actually describes something pretty simple going on, kind of in the background. The law of gravity has nothing to do with where gravity comes from or anything like that. It's just an observation about what is going on. Okay, and so one of the outcomes of the laws of gravity is that everything, regardless of its size, weight distribution, blah blah blah, more or less accelerates towards the Earth at 9.8 meters per second per second. That's just an observation. And Newton was the one who made those observations, as we know. He also made the observation, more or less, that the universal law of gravitation is actually really simple. You just multiply the mass of one object by the mass of the other object in question. You divide it by the distance between them. Turns out you have to square that distance. And it turns out that math isn't good enough to describe what's going on. So you just slap a little big G term in front of it to literally correct it to where it's supposed to be. That's literally how science works. You just, put it together. You make an observation. So what is a theory? A theory is an explanation. So it took many more hundreds of years for Einstein to come around and talk about a theory of gravity. That is an explanation as to what is going on. In other words, maybe asking the question or answering the question, how is it happening? And so Einstein's theories tell us that gravity, once we only knew as an observation, is now, more elucidated with Einstein's theories. That is an explanation. And he thought of it as like bending space-time, for example. We don't need to get into that. What I'm just trying to make sure everyone here understands, including you, dear listener, is that that's the difference between a law and a theory. Both have equal footing in the scientific community. In fact, a theory usually brings together several laws and has a unifying explanation. That's another thing that a theory must do. It must unify ideas in the body of science and the body of knowledge of science.
So,
So,
well,
we just need to be able to agree on some very fundamental things like that before we can even go forward, I believe.
So here's a question for you. One I feel likely has a very short, a very concise answer, but I just wanted to ask.
Sure.
If you find out that a law, if there is the state of affairs is not this law, let's say there's some sort of law of Diftba or whatever else, and it's been going, we've had it for centuries, and then one day it's quite literally like we find a contradiction in it. There's something out there that contradicts this law, this thing. Is that to say that it actually never was a law? It was
No.
what is that thing?
So it cannot possibly work that way, dear listener. It's an excellent question that Trevor brings up. Can a law be broken? Can a law be shown to be untrue? Well, I mean, short answer is yes. The short answer is, if nature changed, if we lived in a unlawful place. By the way, it's a good time to bring up that Sagan bit. Why is it called cosmos? Why do we live in the cosmos? It's because it's the Greek term for law. It's literally the Greek term for being lawful. We don't live in a chaos. We live in a high chaos state, but that's another thing entirely. I'm just trying to get the point across to you that we live in a lawful place where the laws of nature are not subject to change from one moment to another moment, so far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but so what happens if we drop a pencil or a pen or a phone and it doesn't drop at 9.8 meters per second per second? What if it doesn't gain 10 meters of speed every second it falls towards the Earth? That means that our measurements were wrong. That means that the numbers inside those terms are off. We have a certain error associated with that. But we all know that the pen is still falling towards the Earth. That's the observation. What's more, let's say that we find out, much as they did, that Newton's laws of gravity do not entirely explain, for example, the precession of Mercury. Mercury travels around the sun in such a way that Newton's laws did not describe it. It hurt scientists' feelings for years and years. They couldn't jive it with this and this. It means that there's something missing. All right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. It means that there's a missing component. So, for example, for the law of gravity, that would mean that we've got this big term out here. That's what we know. Maybe there's another multiplier in there that we need to put in there. Maybe there's something else in the denominator. Maybe we need to divide by something else that we hadn't accounted for earlier. Maybe we need to add another entire term. That's how science works. We go with the explanation that fits the available facts until new facts come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when I hear all this, and I kind of want to tap on Bray or Michael on this, so I don't just talk for most of this. But when I hear this, when I engage with this observation or this law derived from observation, or that is to say, I'm trying to encounter exactly what we mean by law, because why do I say that?
So Trevor, like I say, it's not for you or me to decide. It's literally agreed upon by the greater scientific community that this is a law. This is what we mean by a law.
So what I'm trying to say is I don't care about the scientific community. That's essentially what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because so why did I say that?
It's a consensus reality.
They don't care about you either.
It's a consensus reality. Michael just said, so here's my essential.
It's not a bad one, but it is one. So that's kind of an abstraction there.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, you just preempted me. I was literally just about to say these are all abstractions. Like we're creating very powerful abstractions. But what I would say is we've thus far up to this point, when we talk about laws, it sounded as if we were saying there are these things that are bedrock, like bedrock built into the state of affairs. But then we had mentioned that the law wasn't accounting for the movement of Mercury. As soon as it failed to do that, it was never a law. Like you discovered, oh, that actually wasn't a law. It failed.
No, that's false. The
Go on.
universal law of gravitation is still true. It still holds true. It still fits all available facts. A law is an observation. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. So like just because we call it observation doesn't mean that any alien species would call it observation or call it a law. That they would have obviously different words for this that mean the same thing.
It's a semantic. Trevor, you're tapping into a semantic issue. Say it again. Go ahead.
Sure. So what I'm saying is this creation of a law, the prior state of affairs, right before the, let's say, okay, there's this law that explains. What am I saying? I'm curious exactly what you think, Michael. If you could go on.
I think you're actually conflating the signpost with the thing that it's pointing at. So when we say law, we as Stephen said, it is an observation. So you can, and I think this is a very basic grade school introduction to scientific method, do an experiment that shows, you average your numbers of measurement using something rudimentary, the law, like the effect of gravity, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you actually... The numbers that you are writing down are derived from a man-made instrument, and so this is human interpretation on physical reality. The physical reality thing that is happening is independent of our discovery of it, is kind of what I'm trying to get at. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about something as a universal law, it means that given any sentient being operating in a similar way that we do anywhere else in the universe, we assume that their part of the universe acts the same way as our part of the universe. Therefore, their gravitational law would be the same.
It's not an assumption. The idea of an assumption will not suffice. Okay, and and these are things that I'm not like
Sure.
in order to have this conversation, we have to begin in the same understanding, right? And so I really want to hear from Bray as well. Like I really, really want, because he keeps just doing the Diogenes thing in the background. Just
I'm almost out of coffee.
But look, it's not an assumption. We can peer into this so-called cosmos for thousands of millions of light years. I'm talking about, we can look at other parts of the universe and with clarity look at them and say, oh,
yes,
they behave the same natural way that we do. I mean, I'm not trying to be nitpicky. I'm trying to be charitable.
Oh, all right. Well, Bray, do you have something?
I've always got something.
Oh.
So I'm gonna reel it back a little bit just because I welcome Michael. My pen. Welcome Michael to the podcast as I grab my
hello.
Pen. Just because there's a few little things that I would love to just throw. I always try to bring a little bit of craziness to the podcast, kind of spice it up a little bit. But yeah, so I know in the preliminary discussions about this topic, we were pretty much set on the fact that, I'm going to be on Steven's side here. Like we're both gung-ho about the science, and I absolutely plan to do that. But Steven is more than capable of...
I was about to say, I don't mind being on my own,
I think he can necessarily say. I think he's very capable of holding his own. He's very versed.
I think, there's a couple of things I would say, and then I'm going to leave with a little question for all of you and see, because I know there will be opinions regarding it. First of all, talking about laws and theories and things like that. Honestly, Michael, I have to give you some credit, even for being mistaken in that sense, because there are so many people that screw it up so bad.
Worse.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, honestly, okay, that was you know, and like Steven said, it's very important to kind of get things on a clear footing. A lot of the time, some people just have words conflated as well.
Right.
I've said before in conversations, like, I don't care what you call X, as long as we both know we're talking about the same thing. Like, we could make up an entirely different conversation with words that to some outsider would be gibberish, but we know what we're talking about, so we can have a conversation and get something out of it. On that, though, just the amount of people that I've heard say the words, well, that's just a theory or something like that. Like, yeah.
And it will not do.
That's what I was trying not to do. That's what I was trying not to do.
And good for not doing it.
Not explicitly enough, I guess, but like I was very like internally trying not to do that.
Yeah, no,
it's very hard to do to encapsulate it a lot of times, Michael. I tell students all the time that are like graduating or whatever, because I see most of my a lot of my students for 3 years in a row, right? And then I ask them that question every year, right? What's the difference between a scientific law and a scientific theory? And they never get it right, ever. And I forgive them for doing so every single time. I'm like, people, it's just a matter of time, and then something will click, and you will totally get it and never make that mistake again.
Right.
But I mean, it's so widespread. It's so widespread. Scientific literacy in this country is a problem.
I have a question that I'm going to throw out there just because we're in here. We're already on a pretty good track so far. So I've seen it feels pertinent to where we were at in the conversation.
Sure.
I've seen a quote before that says, all models are wrong, but some models are useful.
Yes.
And I'm curious what you all think. Is that something that we all like?
I think we're all on that page. That's unfortunately, unless Trevor disagrees.
It's always Trevor with the,
well, for me, actually, I always start with well. God damn it. So
I have a particularly strange conception of how information works for me, but we don't have to.
Well, I'm excited. I'll be very brief. So when I engage with these sort of things, when we talk about modeling, like we have all these observations here. This is very often what I do in the lab all the time. We have all these observations here of all like these baseball players, let's say, like all these pitchers. What I can do is take the information of like the velocity at which they throw the ball and the direction they throw it and exactly how they throw it. And I can build like this perfect ball shooting machine, a model that's used to explain or used to replicate the behavior of all of these like world's best pitchers. Well, this model that I've built, this like pitching machine, will have a certain amount of residual error when it comes to trying to fulfill these pitchers, these like 10 world's best pitchers. There's going to be some failure in order to meet that. Or to make it even easier, a better toy model to think of. Instead, it's like a singular pitcher, like this one particular pitcher. I want to max out. I don't know a single baseball player, so I'm not going to name one. But like this one particular world's best pitcher, trying to perfectly nail exactly his curveball. No matter how hard you try, there's always going to be some. Well, fuck, this is complicated because there's many different baseballs being thrown, and the idea that you could replicate the vibe perfectly just doesn't make sense.
You don't have to get caught in the weeds here, definitely.
You can very easily do so, or at the very least I can. So why did I say all this? I mean to say that all of this modeling that I'm doing is something that I'm functionally doing in any state of affairs. I'm assembling my knowledge based upon observations before me, and I create these assemblages that I use to engage with reality. All of it is modeling. All of it is. Right, you're a model to me. Like that's what you are. You are that. That's what I engage with.
Thank you.
Just like what was said earlier, like touching of the minds that Michael said. It doesn't seem to me to be anything other than the engagement with my own with this state of knowledge. And that's one of the reasons that I have difficulty engaging with this. Well, not difficulty, but like curiosity to these stated laws and how we encounter them. I'm not saying that I disagree with anything. That's perfectly not what I'm saying. I'm saying like exactly how does one encounter it? How does one exist with it? What are exactly we talking about? And with that, Michael, I'm curious what you have to say. Very.
What can you like succinctly state the question?
Oh,
Oh, what I posed was what your thoughts were on the or on the quote, all models are wrong, but some models are useful.
Yes. So to kind of piggyback off of Trevor getting into the kind of cerebral component of that, we are constantly calibrating to our environment. I guess that's the way I frame it, is calibration. So like my life experience has shown me different types of housing environments that I've lived in, different neighborhoods that I've visited, different schools, different types of people. I have ranges on a bajillion little scales up here, effectively, if you could kind of symbolize it that way. And that is how I assess going forward. And it's how I try to make assessments. And sometimes those are wrong, and then I recalibrate on that. And so we sometimes find it very useful to have a consensus on certain models. And that's like the scientific method, is a consensus on this is how we keep track of what we know about the physical world. In some sense, I won't say that's like a hard definition.
It's like you have a bunch of tabulated data tables literally in front of you,
Yes.
and yeah, all that's totally fine. In fact, inescapable.
And the fun part is when you do the collective work in the realm of science, what you do is you fill in this nonogram of reality, right? If you're not familiar, think of it as like all of these little pieces of information that eventually fill in this grid of an image. And the image becomes finer and finer as you continue to polish little corners and uncover a little bit more information, right? And so that kind of comes back to some models are better than others. Your mental model of how other people act can suck. It can also be really good. In the same way, our model of reality in some areas is very nascent. In other areas, it's very well polished. And so that's not necessarily limitations of science touching on that directly, but like it kind of edges in that direction.
No, I actually really appreciate how you say that. It edges in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
It, could we say, converges in that direction?
Ooh.
Could we say that? Could we say that? A model which is arbitrarily close is not useful. So I really like the quote. It is sacred in science that all of our ideas are models. One of the biggest things I do with my students, again, and I'm going to bring them up over and over again. It's literally my job. One of the big things I ask them to do is to point to a model in the room. Once again, in that week one scenario, this is the first week they're meeting me, and I ask them to point to a model in the room. They invariably point to the models of like atoms or little molecule kits I have around the room. They point to those, and of course those are models. Then I ask them to do it again, and they invariably point towards the periodic table, and I say, well, it's not really a model. That's more of a tool. And then I say, okay, well, I'm still wondering, can anyone find the last model for me? And someone will always be brave and point to the equations that I have above my board. Like it's the momentum equation, it's the energy equations, it's the kinematic equations for objects, all those, and they point this weak little finger towards it, like, are they those? And I'm like, yup, that's them. And they're like, well, wait a minute, those are supposed to be rock solid, and it's like, well, yeah, they are. They can be arbitrarily close to the reality at hand. They're still a model, but they can be arbitrarily close.
Yep. Very interesting. And unless anyone has anything particularly they'd like to add, I'd like to take the thoughts somewhere else as well.
We need to get back to the central question.
Yes,
What
we
are
do.
what are the limits on science?
So that's
Now that
exactly
we've
what I wanted to
now that we've
touch
got
on.
a preamble going here, you
So
know.
yeah. So we have a sort of space laid out
Hey,
before us.
real
So
quick, real quick.
ah,
I don't mean to interrupt, but usually I see like a little recording thing. I
It's
don't see
recording
that
on.
this time.
Yeah.
yeah. Currently, I have it recording 29 minutes in 2004, 2005, or
I don't see. I
2905.
don't think I
Yeah.
see that for me.
Oh, weird.
You don't have your
Well, in
little
any
red dot?
case, yeah, we got a little red dot blinking too. If anything happens, anything push comes to shove, we got Bray doing the secondary in the back.
Yeah,
So,
it says that I'm recording. It just usually gives me a time frame thing, and
oh,
I don't
weird.
have that this time.
I don't have a time
Ah,
frame either.
oh, weird.
Should I try to refresh or anything like that, or just leave it alone?
Well, if we do that, we'd have to reset the recording, or else it'll bop us around. Oh,
Okay, so just stay the course.
stay the course. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure.
No, it was a good question. So,
All right.
with that, yes. So what I wanted to talk about was so we laid out before us a pretty good scene here, and what I wanted to explore from this point forward is what can we not do? Like, can we lay out before us some of the things that we are incapable of doing within the confines of the scientific method, within the confines of what we would generally call science, which may include other things? And are those things of value? That is to say, whatever these things are, once we point them out, is it even valuable to even think about them or discuss them? Are they just bad questions or bad realms? Or, what exactly are these things outside of these limits we're talking about?
I can think
Yeah.
of one off the bat, and that's anything that's unfalsifiable.
Yes. Yes.
We can clear
Okay.
that one off the board real quick. So anything
Yep.
that's like really easy example.
Bernard's teapot, literally
Sure.
the teapot.
Yeah. Bertrand Russell, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bertrand Russell did. Matter of fact, I think he talks about it in. Is it Why I'm Not a Christian? The book.
Yes, I
he
think
mentions
so.
it in. He talks about the idea that there's a teapot orbiting the Earth in space. And that if you basically posited this to someone, it's like, well, how could you possibly go about demonstrating that it's not there? You couldn't. It's unfalsifiable, and I believe he uses this in contrast to something like God, and that you'll find in the conversations a lot in a religious conversation about the existence of God. Somebody might say to you that you can't prove there is no God. You can't prove that God doesn't exist, and this is because they are confused about the burden of proof, because it is incredibly difficult in almost all cases to prove a negative in the sense of like prove something does not exist. There are certain things, including some definitions of God, that we could say are not possible based on logical conundrums and things of that nature. But by and large, for the most part, we can't, say, or we should not rather say
We should not. Yeah.
no unicorns exist in the universe, or there is no life anywhere else in the universe. It's like, how could we possibly begin to disprove or prove these things don't? So,
And a small line of nuance to draw, which is things that we currently cannot measure versus things we could probably never measure. In terms of what is actually unfalsifiable and what is temporally, currently unfalsifiable.
well, yeah.
Well, so to that, Michael, actually, the way I explain this to people usually is that the body of knowledge that would be like science or math, if we limit ourselves to like a two-dimensional framework, like a walk in the park type of thing, it's almost like our body of knowledge are the things in the park that we're familiar with, So you can go to arithmetic land, If it was like a theme park, you go to arithmetic land. You could play with all the nice, simple, platonic toys there of putting two blocks together and making a two-block system and so on. You can go to geometry land and play with Euclid's, stuff. But it's like the park doesn't end. But it's like as well, you can't go and look at things really easily that aren't familiar, you know.
Mhm.
And the same is true with the scientific body of knowledge. You don't have to limit yourself to 2 dimensions. You could say, well, maybe there's a body of knowledge above and below a certain thing that we have to access before we can even get there. No matter how you look at it, you're exactly right. Sometimes there are claims that are more or less unfalsifiable, or maybe we just can't justify belief in them. And then we discover something else, and it leads to this other part, for sure.
So, maybe this is like a life philosophy kind of bent or offshoot, but where one steps off the cliff, where uh, there may be components of life or belief or even just personal experience that causes one to say, well, I can barely prove this to myself, but I have experienced it or I've seen it. And how that plays into what lens do you view that thing through?
Through a lens of
And
probability.
we might want to talk about lenses and stances of viewing things first, because that's a pretty
presuppositions.
so the ability to swap between perceptions of reality through different lenses. So the lens of observing a set of facts through a scientific lens, the lens of observing them through the lens of like a specific area like psychology, or maybe the mathematics of what's going on, the physical aspects of this thing that's happening, versus the social, not even science, but just like the social understanding of like the conversation that is occurring. What do these
Sure.
things mean in terms of these undercurrent feeling impulses that are my own internal qualia? I don't know if that term's been popped out on the podcast, but
No.
At least once. We've talked about experience like on at least three separate occasions. Must have.
because this is really where things get beyond empiricism, as it were. Perhaps not forever. Perhaps they're not eternally unfalsifiable. But like internal experience is definitely like, to some degree, still very much in the realm of unfalsifiability. However, you might say that.
Of being unfalsifiable?
Yes, thank you.
What is in the realm of being unfalsifiable?
Uh,
Exactly?
Qualia? Or
Yeah.
specific, so like, say I am imagining something. You can take an MRI or some sort of brain scan. I don't actually know specific technology, but you can watch
Yeah.
people imagine things, and you can kind of replicate. I've seen, maybe we can kind of replicate them on a screen fuzzily. But the degree to which that is clear is it's a very rough model right now. And there's also other things like senses of smell and other senses. Like, these are not things necessarily that we have the tools, but clearly like people experience them, right?
But what claim is trying to be falsified here? Right?
Are you just
That
trying
they
to
are
say, Michael,
experienced.
that like if somebody says they've experienced something, they can't really properly prove that they've had this experience to someone else outside of what could
Right.
be, very by someone else?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so yeah, I mean, to that, very 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 shortly, we live in a realm where the laws of nature cannot be suspended for any one cause or causer, so to speak. And yeah, that being said, I mean, if someone thinks that they have seen a ghost, they have not. They have rendered a false positive. The likelihood that they have seen a dead relative is null. It is just literally nil. Um, they can be educated to understand that that's a false positive, that their genes have given them equipment that is not all the way there. Is that what you mean? I'm just kind of confused.
I think in some way, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that person, right? They would have they would have this thought process that they have seen a ghost, but they don't have to hold on to that falsehood forever. In fact, most reasonable people, once they learn about such a thing as a false positive, they usually let go of that sort of thing, or it may take time, but they usually let go of that sort of thing.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, going on from there, let's see.
We were asking what can we not do with
That's right.
science. I would really like to talk about
So
that particularly.
yeah, follow it a little bit further. So I'll have one thought with what Michael said, and then Stephen, you can interrupt me.
Yeah, sure.
So my thought here was what was that called? Like the what's it? Not not the Chinese box, but this one philosophy of mind toy model.
The Chinese room?
Chinese
Do you
room, not
mean
that.
do you mean
Not
where
that
they shove the
specifically.
paper?
No,
Okay.
see that's the thing. That was the other one. I was thinking of this of what's her name? Something, and she the color red. It's this whole toy example of getting to understand and interact with the color red when having never actually experienced it. If you're familiar with that, so let me explain to the audience a little bit, to the listener. So there's this imagine for yourself a woman. I forget her name. Let's just say her name's Emily for the sake of this episode. And she is a neuroscientist. She knows all facts about the brain. She is very good with the brain. She's an expert in it. In fact, she's an expert in a very particular subset of neuroscience, that of color. She is a master of the color red. She is an absolute master of understanding everything about the brain there is to know about the color red. But there is a caveat to this woman, Emily. She lives in a box. She lives in a white box. All of her life, her entire life, since birth, she has lived in this box as far back as her memory goes. And while living in this box, she has, let's say, a television screen which she engages with, to which she got her online PhD or whatever else it is. However you want to fill your mind with this, but not the TV, not the box, not her skin. Has she ever seen the color red? There is a somethingness about the color red there that she completely does not have. That's essentially what the toy model is trying to deliver to the listener. So what if one day the door opens, this box opens, and Emily steps outside and she sees a rose? Now, does Emily experience something unique? She already knew all facts about the brain. She already knew all that there is to know about vision, and yet she experiences something unique in this experience and seeing this rose. So this is sort of I lay this out as an idea of maybe this is one of these limits of science we speak of, because it's not something that you can quite annotate, explain, or engage with in an empirical stance. It's not something you can really get at in terms
Why
of.
not? Why not? So let me make sure that I'm getting this straight. Okay.
Hmm.
It's as though we had some glasses on a person for their entire life,
Mhm.
told them to study this concept of red without ever having seen it, and then when we take their glasses off, would they experience anything new? Right?
Mhm.
Okay. So you asked me to talk about this in an empirical way, so I will, or at least I will try at least to assert that it could be studied in such a way, or looked at. I feel like that's my function here in this social circle, right? We often adopt different jobs, dear listener, and so I am. So this person, right? Um, they would have studied all this stuff, blah blah blah, but they would not have experienced the color red. What's so important about sight? Um, what I mean to say is, I was reading The Blind Watchmaker the other day, and Richard Dawkins, of course, raising consciousness, above and beyond, um, brought up something about the bat and echolocation and so on. And it was a very funny read, this particular paragraph, because it was going on and on about how, like, in this other world where bats were sentient and humans weren't, and we were just, some other ape species, and just a run-of-the-mill ape species, and the bats were in Congress with each other. I don't know what a group of bats is called, and they were together going, "Can you believe that they see by electromagnetic radiation? Can you believe that crap? How could they get such detail out of electromagnetic, radiation? How does the electric and magnetic component put together make this thing that they can perceive? How does that make any sense?" So I say again, what's so special about the color red? Just because the bat is, or some other similar organism, is the acknowledged master at tracking down, this one little bitty insect among a flood of them, among a flood of their other compatriots who are also vying for that same insect. Who's to say that they do not experience the different shades of their sensory organs? In other words, they echolocate this thing. This data comes back to them, back to their collectors of their ears, and they could perceive something that we cannot possibly imagine. But at the same time, we can develop instruments that can probably exceed the bat's resolution in terms of echolocation. In other words, let's say that we can't. I know that it's just an engineering problem to eventually get past that resolution of the bat. We have instruments that can detect radio waves that we can't possibly see with our eyes. Does that mean that we have not experienced the AM radio thing? What does that even mean? That's what I really want to tackle. What does that actually mean? The experience of red,
So
or the experience of 20 gigahertz of radio waves. What does that even mean?
However, it sounds to me like we're trying to say like it's not worth very much, or this or that. It sounds like we're putting that
that's
into
not
a lens.
that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that if for some reason we had been slightly different, the human species would see different colors, and I guess we would get to experience those. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think so. We would just know a different set of colors.
I
Michael,
think.
yes.
No, I was just going to say in regards to this sort of thought experiment. I think, and this might have something to do with what Stevens is just trying to say. It's always seemed maybe a little tautological to me, because it makes some assumptions maybe that
I agree.
we could know everything about like a color like red, or anything. I mean, you could do anything in this sort of thought experiment.
It's a thought experiment.
Yeah. But
fundamentally, it's not a real situation, so it'll fall
right,
apart if you
but what
apply
we're
reality
talking
to
about
it.
It's not about it being a real situation. I'll give you a real situation. What would the blind say? Who are we to say that the blind have less experience than us because they do not know the experience of red? I don't buy into that at all. I really don't.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's
but they do experience something. Like, it is something. There's a binary there at the very least. There's a separation. I don't mean to devalue the life, all of this of a blind
I don't think
person.
it devalues. It's just different.
Yes. I think that there is something, there is a substantive difference there. And I think that's essentially what the argument is being made in this play model. Now, you're right that it would fall apart. I mean, who has never cut themselves once, in their entire life or anything? But I would say there is a substantive difference. There is, however infinitesimally small, there is in fact a difference. And if you, or at the very least, that's what I'm currently asserting from this model. And if you do agree with that, if you do say, okay, there is a difference, therefore there is something outside of the limits of science that has been laid out before you. There is something there outside of the ability of empiricism.
Okay, yes.
That's
what I was going to hazard to say is not necessarily, because actually, let's define a term here. When we say science, what do we actually mean? Do we mean the cabinet of factoids about physical observations, do we
No.
mean the scientific method?
Both.
Or both in
I would
conjunction?
prefer just the scientific method, but like
I
anything
think-
else, this is
Okay.
an abstraction that you engage with for fun. So I
In
think
regards
think
to
it's
what Trevor
important we
said, I
define
think
the
it
term.
means
absolutely.
like what could be investigated by science, meaning that something was experienced that cannot be observed, or science could not be useful in that avenue.
If you can use the natural world in order to get at something, that thing is within the realm of science. That's usually the way that I engage with it. If you can use the natural world in some sense or of the term, and you can get at something in that term, it is therefore within the realm, the purview of
Trevor,
science.
I don't know if I would define it that way.
Please.
Well, you, Stephen, go ahead and have your thought. But
I was just gonna suggest about this color red business, right? I mean, like, why do people have different favorite colors? It's just a sense of aesthetics, and I'm not trying to just say, well, because it's useless, we don't need to care about it. That's not what I'm trying to say at all.
No. Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that we are predisposed.
based
to
on arbitrary context.
We're predisposed to having at least a set of favorite colors, being that we can only perceive from one wavelength to another, more or less, given some error bars, of course. I mean, it would be foolish to suggest that some humans cannot see other colors than others. What I'm really trying to get at here is that I'm still not following on this. It just sounds like non-material. It just sounds like we're talking about the spirit of red. It's like there's no spirit of red.
Yeah, no, listen.
I mean,
So I understand like what we're talking about physicalism and whether or not there could be something other.
The answer's
So
no.
there's a lot of if that goes in here, and I think this is like another situation where we would have to like be doubly concerned with what we mean when we say something, or what the context of the
Sure.
actual experiment is. Like Michael said, it is just an experiment. So when we talk about, is there something about the color red, that could not be explained physically, or basically that this person could have knowledge of that without ever having experienced it? What's up?
Okay, let me put a pin in the thing that we are trying to distinguish here. Is experience is not something you can experience is not something that is within the realm of a measuring stick of science. Like, the scientific method can record people's reported experiences, and you can look at the data. You fundamentally cannot take that experience and then shove it into somebody else. For now.
Okay.
That's pretty, yes. That's
Like,
essentially,
you can't use that tool. That hammer doesn't hit that nail.
That's essentially
they're fundamentally incompatible.
Yeah, that's essentially what's being said here. That is essentially what is being said here. That there's this thing such as redness that can't be hammered in. It can't be attained via any method that this Emily person, however many neuroscientific facts she attempts to collect, and she's collected a lot of them. She's like the master expert of vision. She knows all facts. Toy model proceeding. But even then, she lacks this thing. However infinitesimally small, she lacks this thing, this experience of encountering red.
Literally the
Qualia.
Literally the qualia.
Yeah,
the perception of the
discussing
qualia.
Yeah.
And you can get into the thing itself here. Yeah.
Bray, you were saying?
No, I just started thinking about, like the potential for someone to experience something like someone else does, which is actually quite a sci-fi idea. Matter of fact, even in the I think I talked about playing Cyberpunk a couple episodes ago, but they have a whole entire thing in the game. They call it brain dances, where you literally like neurally plug into someone else's experience and would therefore feel and experience everything exactly the way they did, which would seem to solve a lot of this sort of discussion. But whether or not that's possible may be another avenue. What's up, Michael?
Let me throw the curveball at that particular, which is going to tie back into what Stephen was talking about earlier about how everybody's kind of set up different and has different experiences to select from, basically, in their range. Yes, even in stuff like Ghost in the Shell, they also do brain linking for
Matrix or
it's all over the place, right?
Interstellar.
And
not Interstellar. Inception.
yes. But I would argue that the individuals, despite them being linked and experiencing the same qualia, do not have the same. So when you experience when qualia hit your system, and forgive me, I'm very fuzzy on the chain of events that happen here. Trevor might be a little bit more on it, but basically you have these layers of things that happen before it bubbles up to consciousness, and you're like, oh, blue. And even before it like really starts hitting, like, so there's this like the thing of there is blue on the object. The object is somehow evoking the blue, and then there's like this registration of, oh, there's a color there's a specific color, it's that one I've seen before, and then you can have these kind of like tangential patterns of what emotions, what memories, all of that stuff is fundamentally unique to each individual.
I think I'm on top of this now. Yeah. So if you were going to do this experiment and you wanted it to be as uniform as possible, you could have all the facts about red for what's the person's name? Emily.
Yeah, that's one we went with.
You could have all of those facts available to this person, but in order for that to be universal in any sense, you would need like a different, like a every single individual person's brain, because it's like the same.
Well, I'll tell you what it would take, Bray, in order such that these clowns will be satisfied, right?
Clowns? Who are you talking about? Are you talking to the listener? Are you talking to me?
You would have to like adopt this this like quantum superposition crap, right? Where it's like here is where you are. Here's the space you take up.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the space that someone else takes up, and you completely overlap them. That's the only possible way you can get what they're wanting.
I've never seen Pacific Rim.
I'm just saying. Like I've seen Evangelion, where they do the brainwave thing and it correlates together.
That's a similar thing, but that's okay.
All I'm trying to say is that like that's the only way these thoughts will ever be satisfied, and it's not possible. You can't convince a single electron to occupy the same exact state as another. You certainly can't do so with a human being. Look, people, all this talk sounds like we're asking the question, what is consciousness, not what are the limitations of science. And what's more, it sounds like we have 4 hominins that have an extremely privileged position, and we think that we're really important, and we're really not. Like, so, like, it just that's always my knee-jerk reaction when you guys blither on about this crap. I'm like, oh my god, like, please stop. Like, they're talking about redness again. but no, seriously, you know I'm joking. So when we talk about the nature of an experience, right? You're saying it's fundamentally different from all other humans. What I would suggest is that it's not sufficiently different to warrant any concern. In other words, the model's
good enough.
Yeah, we have psychological data for this sort of thing, and we can rely on it. It's not bad. It's not bad data. There's no such thing as bad data. There's just data, as opposed to bad science, right? There's certainly a thing as bad science, but there's no such thing as bad data.
Well, this is one of those things where it's just based upon what your presuppositions are and what it is that you're looking for. I do
Well,
think
that's exactly the point. So
yes.
Right.
with science, the idea is to limit that as much as possible by controlling as many variables as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but if you want to go around asking what the limitations of what science is, I think we might be nailing it on the head though if we talk about this thing about experience. And we can say that, oh well, it doesn't really matter. Well, it doesn't really matter in
No,
relationship to
It
Trevor.
something
matters a
See,
hell
else.
of a
see,
lot to
look,
people.
look. Let me put it this way. Hopefully, everybody
It
can see
matters
my
to me at this
hands.
particular moment. Yes.
Hopefully, everybody can see my hands. Look.
Yes.
So here's what you guys are saying, right? That science cannot quantify an experience. Okay. I'll bend over backwards and say that that is completely all right. In other words, we're all capable of qualifying plenty of things. And those are data points too. Qualities are data points, but let's just ignore those for a moment. And then over here, here's what I'm saying. All right, and here's what I've been trying to get to for a while now. Science cannot answer why questions in the form of why is like blue to me, or so to speak. Even that question has a kind of answer. In other words, like how do we see blue? That has a definite answer. But like, why me? Why am I alive? Like just because I can formulate something in English as a legal question, so to speak, doesn't mean it has a scientific answer or is answerable, because it's not something that can be quantified in that way. So look, here's what I'm trying to say. I would like to bridge these two things. I would like to bridge this experience business you guys keep going on about with those why question things you go on about, and literally just merge those two because they're the same to me. Like, of course, science can't tell you what to do with the knowledge you have gathered. It can only tell you what is at hand. It can also tell you what's at stake. It can inform you what's at stake. You know, you could measure how many people are going to die because you decided to do this experiment. You could do that, but you know,
But then there's a value presupposition in that particular.
no, not
On top
really.
of it.
If you assign human life as 0, you could just arbitrarily, say, okay, well, it's going to consume this many human lives. Like it
Yes.
doesn't actually matter. You know what I mean?
Well, science
we-
doesn't care if it matters.
Exactly. Exactly. It's just
That's
telling
narrative.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But narrative is extremely important to us humans, right?
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, as a teacher, I can tell you it is the only way we learn. We literally build schema in our brain to connect these bodies of knowledge. I mean, that's literally how we work.
So I think Michael just said something that kind of put a real like firecracker into the conversation. He said that's the narrative.
So
and I think that's really
So
interesting.
science is not a narrative.
Yes, but
okay. Let me get Midgley in for a second. So recommended reading that I'll be poorly citing, not citing, but like paraphrasing. Mary Midgley, The Myths We Live By.
Yeah.
I will say
Well, I
she was
think
an
I've heard
extreme
this, yeah.
critic of Richard Dawkins, particularly for his narrative about science, not necessarily his science itself.
Sure.
Okay. So
And she's
one of
probably
the one of the core like things that she talks about, one of the core parts of that book and is that there is in fact a sort of residual underpinning of religiosity within the scientific community, and you can see it in the way that things are phrased and the way that things are adhered to. She terms it scientism. So if you wanted to like skim a Wikipedia article, I believe that is one. She's not the only person who have used that term. I don't even know if she coined it, but so the particular here is kind of reaching at, and this delves into limitations of science insofar as people use science and then narrativize around it in order to get certain political or ideological opinions pushed, which do not belong to science, but are in fact using science in some angled way. And
so Michael,
yes.
I would retort with that's literally my job, right? So
Sure.
So it's
You are
quite
in some sense
literally.
a priest or a preacher of science
So
in a very like abstract, if you know,
false.
yeah.
But so like
I could
Yeah,
preempt
sure.
that
You
by
can say that,
my
but I'm gonna pull more, phrasings out the ether. But go ahead.
yeah. But what I mean to say is just because, some person said something in a book doesn't make me a priest of any kind, right? So what I mean to say is that it's literally our job as a species to decide what to do with the knowledge that the scientific process, you know, uncovers, so to speak. Now, of course,
Yes.
we are the doer in every situation. In other words, the scientific method does not work in our absence. I mean, that's stupid. We're here to execute this method. We're here to execute this process. Now, we are doing it.
Human construct.
But we're not necessarily doing it for human gain, even sometimes. So, our dear listener, you need to understand something about science. There are plenty of narratives about science. But as Michael has already said, science is not itself the narrative. Every other ideological framework that we've come up with so far falls short in that regard. It is the narrative at play, and that's part of the problem. In fact, it's a very big part of the problem. Um, just because humans always necessarily have a bias does not mean that the scientific process or method is in question. That would be uh,
That would be
that that would
absurd.
that would be absurd.
You,
That would
that would
be
be tossing the
tantamount
baby
to
out with the bathwater. It's not
right.
a correct logical conclusion to have.
Right.
Yeah.
But so like Michael, the only reason why I want to come down on this so hard is because I don't want you to sound foolish to other people. The
Certainly.
idea of like non-overlapping magisteria is like belongs in the 90s. Like we've left that behind. You know, we know now that like to quote Dawkins again, we know now that the gardener and the priest have just as much as each other to say about like the origin of the species or of the universe or anything like that. Um, you know, it is the job of every scientist to not to like actively say to himself or herself, I'm not a priest and I'm not trying to be, you know. But of course, every human necessarily has a bias. You can't avoid that. All you can do is try to control it, or to control
Mhm.
for it, literally with controlled variables and so on.
If you guys don't mind, I would put this in here just to kind of slip it in between, because I'm sure there's something to be said in response. But I agree, Michael, that I think, and I think both of you ended up kind of around the same page there, as far as like science isn't the narrative. There are narratives made around science that are then pushed for whatever reasons. And I think that applies to a lot of things. And like Steven said, I mean, it's kind of his job to have some narrative, if I'm correct, in
So
that.
let me reiterate that just real quick, Ray. It is literally my job as a teacher of young people to show them this is science.
Mhm.
This is the unalterable word of God, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, please, like that's why I cannot stand whenever I hear, you're a priest of science. Like, no, I'm not telling anyone this is the unalterable word of God. So here's the body of knowledge and the
Mhm.
process of science. Here's what we do with it. This is part of my job
Right.
too. Like as a philosopher, though, that's why I've told Bray and Trevor here that I kind of do this every day, and I don't get really tired of it. I am
Mhm.
a philosopher, and as Hitchens said, chemistry replaces alchemy. Something
That's
replaces
exactly what I was going to get at.
yeah,
Yeah.
astronomy replaces astrology, philosophy replaces religion. So I it is part of my job to tell these young people we probably shouldn't hurt each other with the knowledge we have gained.
Mhm.
We probably should not use nuclear energy, the stuff of the universe, as a way to hurt each other. Like, that's also part of my job. But as a science teacher specifically, I separate those two as completely as I can, as I'm able. I can't separate them completely because I have a bias, but I have acknowledged I have one, unlike the priest.
Right, and that would have been my only pushback. Would have been that even if we stood these up together, like a priest and a teacher, and looked at their
One of them is worth
instructives,
something.
like, then I would say, well, if they're both people that represent or that want to represent a body of something,
sure,
and they both are trying to, communicate this to the masses, like the importance of this material, I would then say, okay, well, let's look at the material, and let's also look at what's been done with the material, and whether or not that has been some great benefit to our society, or whatever we're all really hoping for here, which I guess would be a better world to live in. I want to be able to buy a house, like
yeah,
things,
baby steps. Let me buy a house
the important things. Like, I want to see the fruits
talk about
of the
value
labor
of both. Yeah. I think we're quite
One
aware of the value of science, right? Stephen, I really appreciate the militant atheism coming out here, but like so this is actually limits of science. So psychology is famously talked about as a soft science. It's often harumphed on or stomped on as considered as a science because it is very dubious in nature as considered, right? But it is still inherently useful as it actually replaces a lot of functions that the former religious priest class used to perform for a lot of the populace that no longer participates in that aspect of culture.
I would prefer to say all of them, assumedly. Like, I would assume it replaces all of them.
Well, we're talking about the current state of affairs here right now, so it would not include all of them.
We're talking about an admixture. And we're also talking about, I want to get into the imperfection, but also how it is like a really interesting evolution on that very self-same thing. It is not bereft of its origin in kind of tapping into the exact same...
It can't escape its origin, just like we can't.
No. And even to the point of like pointing out that like it is no coincidence that a lot of modern Western therapeutic techniques that are in their heyday, even right now, like mindfulness, different types of breathing, different methods of cognition about the self, all come from essentially what is residual from the hippie movement, because that was ground zero effectively with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert at Harvard or Stanford. Sorry.
Big college.
There's something about the Bay Area. There's something in the water there.
Yeah. That and like Ram Dass over at Berkeley doing his thing.
That's Richard Alpert. Yeah.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
Yeah, same guy.
God, I mixed up the name there. Thank you.
They're the same guy, and he was a very large progenitor of the hippie movement, but also like how that leaked into psychology was he was a doctoral psychologist. He was a I don't remember his professorial rank, but he was a professor there. He was teaching classes. He did get thrown out because he was doing drugs and he was saying crazy shit to his students, and he was doing crazy things at guest lectures. And
sounds like he's disreputable.
But at the end of the day, we now have very effective methods that have been transpiled over from, I'll say, in parts Buddhism, in parts other areas of Asia, into kind of a clinicalized version of themselves that has become useful in modern therapies. In some way, you can see that as the transposition of coincidence. I think not, because of how these things came to people. So when we talk about the narrative, we can also talk about the why that very often gets expunged from any kind of scientific paper. Like, why did you do this research? What was your like, you were walking in the park and you were like, oh, hey, I see that. I want to go study that. that doesn't usually show up in a scientific paper, and it actually is actively like expunged because it's not considered necessary material, and it's actually considered like not sterile enough. And like, I'm not here to debate on that, what my opinion is on that, but that actually is incredibly important as far as like how we use the information that we derive.
It could reveal a bias.
It could reveal bias. It also happens to be like directly connected to how we're actually going to use the information. So like a lot of scientific research happens because defense contracts want it, or because pharmaceutical companies pushing for it, or because you know, it's going to earn the professor a chunk of change that he can funnel into his lab. Like, these biases are very real. They're very pertinent, and they are not very often like recorded and set upon in the public eye in the same way that like publication in Nature might be.
It probably should, if we want to dive into that just at least peripherally. It probably should be the case that people who write these serious papers probably should tell us where the money came from and
Well,
so
no, they
on.
do.
Oh no, that you
They
necessarily
do generally. That happens
yes.
in the
No,
attribution.
I'm not
Yeah, that's in
talking
the
about just the
disclosures.
money, though. I'm talking about the motivation as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Hmm.
but we do cut it out. We have been cutting it out since I want to say circa the 30s.
I know for the final thing for my capstone project, I did do a motivation section. And
Mhm.
a lot of the papers I read as previous research had a motivation section. So I mean, you know, but you're right. Like a lot of the bigger ones have like all that kind of missing.
And that's part of the cultural narrative of like what is acceptable in a paper. And that's actually really important, right? So
Right.
like when we talk about inducting people into producing papers and producing like scientific research, they have to learn that from like ex nihilo almost. But I mean, it comes from their advisor. But like they don't have that because you can just read papers all day and not really know what was the sequence of motivation here.
Well, sometimes, well, I can talk about this a little bit because, like, I've worked in the lab for the last year and a half now, and
Sure.
we've been submitting work here and there to various places, and I've taken a role in a lot of work that's been put out. So a lot of the time when it comes to research, and like, so I can only speak from where I come from, and why did I say that? Well, I bring up there's huge variance in how every type of like subtype of what you would call like let's say like neuroscience, geography, geology, astronomy, like quite different. Like the type of experiences, what am I saying? The type of experiments you can do in astronomy is quite different from what you can do in neuroscience. But anyway, within this particular subset, within what I do, a lot of the time the issue is when we talk about motivations, is that you are inside of a door that's you're in a television set that's within a room that's within a room that's within a room within a television set off to the side. That is to say that you're in a very specific location. You're doing something very specific. And a lot of the if you want to talk motivations, there's really a lot you need a lot of room to be able to cover everything that you want to cover. So there's a lot of papers I've read and that have directly catered with my lab that have given really good introductions. Like there are quite a few, especially not like the classical scientific method papers, but a lot of what would you call them?
Study papers.
Study papers. Like those kind of things that
Literature
go through and like
reviews?
inductive method,
Yeah.
inductive reasoning papers, where they bring in like 50
Okay.
different papers brought in from all around, and they
A
try to
literature
Yeah,
review.
yeah, definitely.
Oh
a
well,
review.
you just nailed it on the head. That's exactly what it is. It's a
Yeah.
literature review. So there are a lot of those that kind of come through and list their motivations and reasoning. But a lot of the time, the reason why a lot of research papers lack that sort of information, they lack a motivation, is because they're doing something extremely specific, and it would take a lot of time. And a lot of the time, you are very limited in what you can put in the space of the paper. And why would I discuss motivations, which I already know, and a lot of the people that are reading this paper, I assume already know, when I could use that space to like print all of these analyses that I did. Like you don't know how much was left behind on the cutting
Meta-analyses,
floor.
you know.
Yes, you don't know how much. I can tell you, I put months of work into a research paper that ended up only being, it sounds like a lot, like something like 22 pages long, but that is basically nothing. Like that is basically nothing. Like especially it's just like you
I
put
know.
so much work and everything gets left by the cutting floor. And a lot of the time it's a bit like this is going to be such a stupid analogy, but remember Nemo, that movie, Pixar movie? All
Go
right.
ahead.
All right. So in that movie Nemo, there's this part where like there's this stream. You got to get on the stream, dude. And it's like those turtles that are like going on that stream. And like it's
Yep.
hard to get into the stream. It's really fucking hard to breach into that stream, but as soon as you're in there, you're off. You
It's
know?
the current, yeah.
Yeah, you can get into the current of a certain way of ideas. And a lot of the people within a field actually it's contingent upon you, or it's incumbent upon you, or whatever that word is, to enter the stream yourself. Like, you want to understand this paper? Oh, well, you better, get reading. You should go out there and read 30 something research papers, considerably more than that. They assume that if you're going to take this seriously, you're going to read this research paper, you're going to dive into and enter into this culture that they've created for themselves, that they've devised for this particular subset of like neuroscience. Like I work in an Alzheimer's disease
This
field.
is the spot where we talk about this.
Yes, and they assume that you know exactly what an SUVR is. You know exactly what tau PET methodology is in terms of like Alzheimer's disease. You know exactly what areas.
There's no other way to talk about this.
Exactly.
If
like,
go
and I don't
level
have
lower, you
yes.
no longer have the vocabulary to describe
Yes.
everything that's going on.
It's
That's
and
the
it
nature
is
of
to,
specialization.
And it's not necessarily intentional either. It's almost just
it just happens.
yeah.
cutting
I
floor.
just have to
don't
say
enough
this
space.
too.
Yes.
I'm the like sole arts student sitting over here in the corner, like what?
No,
the
that's
fuck
not
are
true.
they talking
That's not
about?
true. That's not true. I got
Well, I feel like stuff applies for you as
Bachelor of
well.
Arts. I will say.
I feel like it might apply for you as well. It's just we have to abstract it a little bit. So in art, well, I don't know if you finished your tangent.
Just think about the
No, please go ahead. Interrupt me.
So I really like comparing skills because they are fundamentally kind of the same when you get really abstract.
Yes.
So in the arts, Bray, you're gonna have to. I'm gonna have to lead you, and you're gonna have to fill in the gaps here. But like, bear with me. So you learn fundamentals, right, from day one. I don't know if it's color theory. I don't know if it's like basic form ideas or how to perceive the world. Taking into account a more intermediate thing might be taking into account the curvature of the eye when you're doing any sort of like really weird perceptual work.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a buddy who's been talking about that. He's been self-teaching for a while. And you build these increasing degrees of polish on top of what you are actually working with, right? So you and the thing is, like, these disparate areas, like say figure drawing and model work, as far as like clay models or any sort of like material modeling, these things actually do have a point at which they intersect, where they like kind of blend into each other, probably, I would assume. Because I can tell you in my field, there's totally stuff where it's like column A and column B look completely different, but at a certain point, you can actually get insight on each other.
He's busting out the SQL.
And you can build up on them. And they kind of integrate, and then they create a new thing, and you get your synthesis, and you get your insight out of that. And I think that happens as well in the art world, where like somebody who like, okay, me, I am like predominantly just talking off of a lot of skimming and like knowing a lot of artist people. So like, catch me where I fall short, but you are privy to levels of information that are like layered and layered and layered, in the same way that like people who might write papers on certain like very specific mathematics or very specific neurological phenomena, it's layers.
Okay, I get it. It just got really heavy there for a second, and I was like, man, where's it? Also, fun fact, did not know that psychology was a BA.
Yes, it is. To my own chagrin, it was, and that's one of the reasons why I so desperately ran off trying to find
science, baby.
God fucking damn it! I hated it.
Well,
I
coming full circle.
We've talked about this before,
Yes.
and I know I've brought this up, maybe not on the podcast, but look, I talk about this all the time. If we take all the body of knowledge and the process of physics, right? we could understand everything in chemistry through a lens of physics, right? We can understand everything that happens in chemistry through physics. Okay, well, but we can understand everything in biology as it happens with chemistry. We can understand everything in psychology as a kind of specialization on biology, right, and human behavior. And we can understand everything in, sociology, kind of like as an extension of psychology. And we can understand culture on top of this. And it's a very small bit in a very large pyramid.
I think
I
I
mean,
think we've touched on another topic that I wanted to get into, but I didn't think we had the time. We might have to talk about it later. The idea that
Okay.
analysis can be used perfectly. That is to say that there are things above levels that cannot be explained by the levels that precede them.
Let me toss out a phrase from computer
Please.
science real quick. Leaky abstraction.
right.
Explain.
So a leaky abstraction is whenever you have an abstraction layer, but there are holes in it.
Like
There
a
are
sieve.
inconsistencies, and you can actually, reach through to the bottom, the exposed under layers. And also, very specifically, I think leaky abstraction is used to refer to abstractions that aren't perfect. So, like, they're not one-to-one. I lose access to certain underlying components when I abstract them.
Yeah, every
there are
level
instances
you
where
go up in this model, you lose something.
Right. But you can still explain sociological happenstances in like microcosms. Say a well gets poisoned, but it's like a weird heavy metal thing, and everybody in the town gets kind of weird about it. You can still explain that from like a biological standpoint, even though like a sociological like happenstance. So like the Salem witch trials, that's a sociological happenstance. This is a multiple psychological models interacting with each other. But the fundamental thing underneath that was that there is fungus in the water or whatever, some sort of chemical leakage that was causing them to get kind of hallucinatory. And then, so reaching into abstractions, pulling things out, connecting dots.
Yeah, so it sounds so this is one of those things that I'm not perfectly convinced by, but it's still an idea that's thrown around quite often. It's this. I went to Michael. You remember this, I think. System science. Those series of lectures we went to. They weren't officially classes at La Tech, but nevertheless they were there. And one of the main ideas from those classes was analysis, breaking things down to understand them, doesn't perfectly cover what things are. That is to say, if you work above levels, if you go above lower levels, there are things that happen at that higher level that cannot be explained perfectly just by looking at it by its consummate parts underneath it. Do you remember this?
In other
Yes.
words, Trevor, like for example, you could say that it kind of goes back to that model thing again, of course, but you could almost say that one cell, one individual cell, is not readily explicable by just the principles of chemistry, right? And one person is not explainable by just the interactions of their cells. That's perfectly that's not the case that it can or cannot be. That is true.
Well, I'm not even sure if we have enough time. I think we're hitting
like
at
something we've
I think we're also
almost,
like a little off topic. I don't know.
No, actually, I think we may not be, because this
I don't think we are.
I think
Tie it back in for me.
we're in the realm.
So I specifically bring this up because it's an avenue of science, talking about analysis. That is to say, breaking things down versus the idea that there are things at higher levels working upwards.
You're just zooming in
Is-
or
Such
zooming
Here's
out.
an example.
Well, is that science, or is that breaking things down and then do the scientific method to like?
Think about it. Think about it like we were saying earlier with a meta-analysis of a lot of different papers. Okay, so let's say that you were looking at a bunch of papers that were answering a specific question.
Yes.
And then some percent of them said yes, some percent of them said no, some percent of them were inconclusive, whatever. Well, then you're doing a meta-analysis, but you're necessarily losing the data it came from. Do you see? You're gaining the meta-analysis, but you're losing the data itself. And that's what Trevor's talking about. What is there a case where, like, you do a meta-analysis that cannot be understood. That like the findings up here cannot be understood from the individual data points that they long since came from, so to speak. Because you can do an arbitrary number of meta-analyses.
Yeah. And also the context in which, so like say you hold an experiment with a very specific context, you've actually nailed it down quite a bit, and it's got a ton of variables, but you've managed to nail down and like excise variability within those. Let's say that context gets abstracted out in a literature review, and that the conclusions of the paper are then used outside of that context. Let me say that is a thing that might not happen in a literature review. It may, but it does happen a heck of a lot with pop science.
Oh yeah, for certain.
Which is where a lot of misconceptions come
science. I literally call that Jimbro science in my classroom.
Yeah.
Well, we could. This might be a good place to cut on account of how it's where we usually do. I wanted to spend a second, if we could, either rant about pop science, rant about the topics at hand, wherever you like.
Well, no, we should just make a new topic about that.
No, we most certainly should. We most certainly should.
A continuation on this about popular science, Jimbro science, about the nature of data and so on, and how it's used to fool people.
I actually really like that. Very cool. All right, pop science.
I'd even moderate that one.
Would that be take your favorite pop science fact that's not really that correct?
And
needs more nuance, and then bring some nuance into the fray.
Did you know that fast walkers have higher IQ?
Did you know that your brain stops developing at like 25 or 26?
Yeah, did you know we only use 20% of our brains, and that there was an entire movie made about someone who could use...
What if they used
I'll do
all
you
of
better
your
brain?
Oh my God.
Scarlett Johansson could use her whole brain.
The
stupid idea of like we only use this much % of our DNA to actually make a human.
Scientists hate her.
Hate it.
All right. With that, let's start with Bray. Bray, you got a cool outro in mind? You got something you want to say before we cut out?
Absolutely not. But there is something that Michael said earlier that I thought would be a great jumping off point into something else. Is prior to the discussion on whatever the hell was going on with the scientific papers, he said something about the usefulness of Eastern religion in modern therapeutics. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Practices.
We
will. So it has been clinically like breath work techniques. The idea of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. That's very Eastern. That is literally like psych people going out east, or even probably going just to Berkeley or that Bay Area, going to some retreats and being like, hey, what if I did some research on this and like prove that it actually helps people, and then implement it into a practice, and then you get mindfulness.
We have an entire psychedelics part of our neuroscience.
Now see, this is the thing, is that you may be surprised to hear this about me. It's not something that I do all the time, but I enjoy reading about it and trying things out, is that I actually really enjoy reading material on mindfulness. And there's a reason that I enjoy reading material on mindfulness as opposed to actual religious texts, or more, I find it sort of in the middle, because while someone could describe it as spiritual or whatever the hell that word means, I find that it has a little bit more of a, I think I'm going to get shot for saying this, but scientific basis, in the sense that there are demonstrable things. Like if you sit down, and just like my watch, I don't have it on, but it'll tell me every so often I need to sit down and breathe, or I just stop or stand up. And this is all in an effort to improve my well-being, increase blood flow, or help, recenter myself health-wise. I like that. Like people that they give descriptions of like meditative walks you can take. Love that stuff. I'm glad you clarified a little bit of that, because I was leaning into the avenue that it was like, well, this sounds like something where these religious practices are helping people feel good, but they may not be true. And now that you've
Not better than
clarified,
placebo,
I get
you know.
the difference, and I get what you were actually
Well,
saying by that.
Well, if I wanted to look at it from a we'll say consensus of this current group, except for maybe me, reality lens, um, you can almost say that throughout the centuries, people have intuited ways through feeling how in experimenting with how they feel doing certain things and recording that, and then having other people do it and recording that
And that's why I called
loosely
it a coincidence.
as a prototype of the scientific method,
Mhm.
because the scientific method is a much more rigorous, specific way of doing that.
Mhm.
But I would argue people, I mean, we wouldn't have agriculture if people didn't figure out how to convey information about how to do things specific ways.
Okay.
But basically that mindfulness, so the act of sitting there with your thoughts and watching your thoughts, right? That may be something that you've done with like a mindfulness app or through like a guided meditation or whatever. That's literally like, I don't remember the exact word, but like there is a like Hindi word for that, because that is a type of meditation that was developed in that part of the world.
Sure.
But
It's
Bray,
not like it's exclusively from that part of the world, but it is very
Yeah.
like
And
definitely the
the-
part where that was pulled from because of the cultural impetus.
Sure.
of-
And just so we don't go to actually dive into the topic.
We're gonna start a new episode.
I'm just
right
saying
now, yeah.
that's
Sorry.
what I like. It's like I can take those things and they have no real religious bearing on me. But if I suddenly start doing
Exactly.
this and then start believing in deities,
right.
then I'm like, well, we've crossed the line.
well,
I
so
will
Bray,
say,
look,
I will
that's
say, I will
that's
say,
my piece on that.
I will say one thing. I'm currently reading the Upanishads right now, the principal Upanishads.
Oh.
This is the one that was filled in by I forget, I can't pronounce his full name, but it was the second. It was the first vice president of the modern India, and the second president. Either way, when you go through this, if you ever sit down and read this thing, it's quite shocking. Some of the things that you will find, like there's this one particular part that kind of changed me. It definitely gave me a weird day. This one segment that essentially had said, this one particular Upanishad, where it had said that there are no gods except where you look. There is no, basically, it isolated all of these ideas of gods doing this, this, and that. And it isolated it to there is only just the self. There's only Bray. There is only Bray. And all of it is just the way that Bray engages.
Exactly.
I had read that, and that's the Upanishads, don't you see?
The rest of you are a figment of my imagination.
But don't
Well,
you see what that means? You were
Well,
engaging
your
with
process and your models of interpreting, yeah.
yes. Well, don't you see what that means? You were engaging with a straw man, not the ideas that are actually contained within the ancient philosophies, or at least not this one. Isn't that insane to you? Isn't that insane? Perfectly insane. Anyway,
look.
against
all I was
what
gonna say
everything
about
we were
this
talking
is,
about.
look, Bray, I happen to know, is a secular humanist.
Yes.
So it comes as no surprise to me whatsoever that he's reading, his version of feminist literature. You know what I mean? Like, I can see Bray sitting in bed reading half-baked religious texts. I mean, but no, really, I mean, people, I would like to wind up here by saying, or wind down by saying rather, that I would just like to reiterate kind of what I said at the beginning. Science in a lot of ways is your only hope, and people who say otherwise do not have your best interest at heart. And I really do mean that. That being said, if a dear friend, turns you on to this like pseudoscience crap, or starts asking the big questions like what are the limitations of science, or starts throwing around terms like
what does red mean?
Yeah, what does red mean?
I have one question for God. Why?
I'm not saying that they hate you. I'm not saying that they hate you. I'm saying that it's worth a thought, and you need to really, really consider, what helps you and what doesn't. All right, so take care of each other.
Beautiful. That's probably a good place to cut right there, unless anyone wants to give themselves an extra outro. This has been Four Mortal Coils, episode 19. I'll see you on episode 20. Very wonderful.
Thanks,
and thank
Michael,
you,
for
thank you, Michael, for showing. Oh my God, what a wonderful addition! And if you have any thoughts, do you horribly disagree with Michael? Do you heinously agree with Michael? You think he's great? Steven,
Text
something or other.
123 Michael. If you'd like to see Michael again.
You'd like to see Michael again. Just type Michael in the chat. Just put it in just single word, Michael. Just hey Michael, and we'll know. We'll know.
And I thought it was ultimate like pure poetry that to defend the weak axioms of theism today, we got who is like God to come and help us out,
Oh yeah, certainly. Nominative determinism and all that,
Yep. Stupid.
All right.
Oh,
With
brilliant.
that, have a wonderful night. Be excellent to each other. We'll see you on the next
Most
episode.
Be excellent to each other.